The White Sox have called up a lot of prospects this season, so let's discuss with my guest who's left worth monitoring on today's episode of Locked On White Sox.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm your host, Todd Welter, lifelong Sox fan and contributor for SouthsideShowdown.com, part of the FanSided Network, and also I've covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press. And thanks for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure to hit the like button on today's episode. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already, and also follow or subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Well, Sam Phalen should have won Survivor. He's also the site expert of SouthsideShowdown.com, and he joins me today to discuss what prospects are worth monitoring now that Colson Montgomery and even Tim Elko is back up. Then we're going to do some draft talk and then some trade deadline discussion. And I didn't say that you should have won Survivor because you're also my boss at SouthsideShowdown.com. You should have won. You were robbed, man. You were robbed.
Thank you. I agree, Todd. But you know what? What can you do? We live and we learn. We move on. Maybe next time I'll go get the W like the White Sox did today against the Toronto Blue Jays. Happy to join you. Happy to talk a little prospects. I told you before we hopped on here, it is a fun time to be a baseball fan, right? It comes and goes, whether or not it's a fun time to be a White Sox fan, but between the Futures game, the All-Star game, the Home Run Derby, the trade deadline, there's just so much going on in the world of baseball right now.
Yeah, and at least the White Sox are more enjoyable to watch, right now. And we're going to definitely get into Adrian Hauser in the third segment because of just some people, maybe overrating his trade value. But one of the things that I definitely wanted to get you on, you already read and edited and all that. Who's worth paying attention to on SouthsideShowdown.com in the minors? So let's start with your list. Who's worth monitoring in the Knights, especially now that Tim Elko's back?
Yeah, well, I think you hit on a lot of the names, Todd, in your piece for Southside Showdown. Really, when you look at the upper levels of the minor leagues right now, Birmingham and Charlotte, it's really pitching heavy at this point in time. Like with Colson Montgomery's promotion, there's not too many offensive position players, maybe Jacob Gonzalez in Birmingham, a former first-round pick that you're just trying to monitor and see if he can turn into something. But a lot of the guys, right? It's Noah Schultz in Charlotte. It is, Hagen Smith down in Birmingham. I am every week becoming a bigger fan of Shane Murphy and what he's done with the Birmingham Barons, a left-handed pitcher who I think will make his major league debut for the White Sox this year at some point in 2025. And when you look for the position players, I think you have to go a little bit further down. You look at Caleb Bonnemer has certainly been exciting, showing a lot of tools, and Braden Montgomery. Sam Antonacci, too, I think is a really interesting prospect that doesn't get a ton of buzz. He was a fifth-round pick by the White Sox in 2024 out of Coastal Carolina and has sort of just always produced, had a over 1,000 OPS in his final year at Coastal Carolina, and this year has an 853 OPS with the Winston-Salem Dash. He earned June Player of the Month for the White Sox as well in the minor leagues. So Antonacci is a guy that I like a lot. One guy I don't think you had on your list that I would have included is Christian Opper, who is in Winston-Salem, I believe, and just kind of looks like absolutely nasty lefty with a great slider that he throws from an interesting arm angle.
Yeah, I mean, I like how you brought up Antonacci or Gonzalez as, those are more raised floor guys, but they also might be able to fit a profile that could at least serve as bat to ball skill guys. And then the White Sox can then maybe start to load up on these things called, power hitters. And we'll get that in the second segment. But the other guys that I think are worth watching too are Peyton Pallette, Winkelman, Gonzalez, just because those are, you want a cheap bullpen. And we saw it today, we're recording it today, but for tomorrow, will be yesterday, what you got in terms of Grant Taylor and then Jordan Leisure getting you those big outs, cheap arms. And that way, since the White Sox are not going to be having a spending spree in the next, 4 years, it would be nice to have those cheap arms. So then the limited money Jerry does authorize could be used on a guy that could put the team over the top, maybe to be competitive.
Yep, Peyton Pallette's certainly a guy that I think could make his MLB debut at some point this year. We've already seen a little cup of coffee from Winkelman Gonzalez. The other guy, Zach Franklin, I think you mentioned him and touched on him briefly as well. in your piece. But Zach Franklin in Birmingham, he's a 26-year-old. He's got a 1.85 ERA, and he's sort of been used in this multi-inning relief role. He's done 34 innings with 53 strikeouts for the Barons. So he's got some of that big swing and miss stuff that, the White Sox tend to look for in relievers. And he's another guy, homegrown, lots of control. Probably, hopefully, see him at some point this year if he continues to pitch well, and the White Sox could end up with a good reliever out of it. When we look at this year's deadline, I just think it makes all the sense in the world for them to maximize what they have on the pitching front, and even relief pitchers like Steven Wilson, who has 2.5 more years of control and is having a fantastic year for the White Sox. Makes sense to trade, but if you're going to keep trading these arms, you're going to have to replenish, what you've got in the big league level, and those are the prospects that could potentially be called up to do that.
The only thing that I get a little concerned with Franklin is does he get the Addison Coffee treatment? Because notice I didn't have Addison Coffee on my list. So for those that are like, what's your list? It's on SouthsideShowdown.com. But like for Charlotte, I had Schultz and I had, Gonzalez, Paulette, and that. But I didn't have Addison Coffee because if they haven't called him up by now, and I know he kind of went on a struggling spree too. My concern is, do they start to realize that these guys get at a certain age that they just maybe are like, well, they're just nothing more than depth. And that's my fear for Franklin.
Yeah, I mean, he's 26, Coffey's 26. So you're certainly hitting that point where, you want to start getting some MLB impact from those guys. My hope, at least, that we've seen the White Sox do this a little bit in the last few years, is that they remain with the kind of team that they have in place right now. And then as soon as the trade deadline comes and all these trades are made, it's a different roster. And it's, Zach Franklin and Addison Coffey and all these guys that we've been waiting to see. They give, a few guys another shot. I'm forgetting the name right now on the lefty that they called up, Jake Palish, for one game, right? And then sent him back down. Give those guys a chance, see what you have. I believe they did that at the end of 2023 as well. And that's when we saw a lot of like the Lane Ramseys coming up to the White Sox and pitching down the second half of the season for them to then reassess what the group looked like going into 2024.
Yeah, and I also had Jairo Iriarte. I mean, it almost seems like, he's been forgotten, and he was the guy that at least got the Arizona reset, as I called it. Were you a little bit surprised though that they didn't give Nick Nastarini the Arizona reset? Because we're talking about like guys that you just can't be getting rid of pitchers, it seems like. Because again, look at all the Tommy John injuries, and then all of a sudden they're just like, we're going to get rid of Nick Nastarini because we're just giving up on him.
Yeah, I am surprised that Nastrini is already out of the organization. It's so hard because he hasn't pitched well. They've tried a lot of different things with him, bullpen starting, whatever. He's given up a lot of runs, but White Sox fans that watch Nastrini in 2024 know that like there were some really good competitive starts there. This is a former top 100 prospect that has done quality starts at the major league level, and it's hard to give up on that. Like there was a time, maybe around this time last year, Todd, where we're sitting here and there's not really a huge separator between Nick Nastrini and Jonathan Cannon. They were in pretty much the exact same boat. They were both sort of these wild cards, and Jonathan Cannon flourished in the back half of 2024. Nastrini went back down to the minor leagues and struggled, and now one of them is no longer with the organization. So I am surprised, and I'm hoping that they don't give up on too many more of those types of talents. I'd like to see these guys get their shot in the major leagues, and hopefully, with trade deadline clearing up some roster spots, they can do that soon.
All right, so there was a method to my madness of also, programming the show this way because I wanted to go over again what does this, what's going on in the minor league system, because I want to go to the draft after the break because it's super pivotal for the franchise. I wanted to address what's going on with the minor leagues before we talk about the draft, and let's jump into if it will be a disappointment if the White Sox actually take a pitcher with the 10th pick, and that's after the break on Locked On White Sox. Have you ever decided at the last minute to head to a ball game with friends or family? Maybe it's game day and you suddenly realize you want to be in the stands. That's exactly where Game Time comes in. It's the easiest way to grab last-minute tickets without the stress. With the money you save on tickets, you can splurge on food, drinks, merch, and even invite a bigger group to come with you. Game Time makes it possible. Game Time makes buying tickets fast and simple. Prices on the app actually drop the closer you get to first pitch, and they've got incredible last-minute deals, clear seat views, and the lowest price guarantee that takes the worry out of buying. Game Time has last-minute tickets and zone deals for big savings like 10% off exclusive zone deals for the upcoming Cubs versus Red Sox game on July 20th. And it might be the rival Cubs, but you can hate watch the crosstown rivals while also supporting the team that sent the White Sox so much in the Garrett Crochet trade. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets, concert and theater tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, make sure to hit the like button on today's episode and subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already. And if you can't get your show on YouTube, Locked On White Sox is available on all major podcast platforms. So make sure to follow or subscribe on places such as Apple or Spotify. Either way, get your 30-minute fix of Chicago White Sox baseball venting with me. Here with Sam Phalen, site expert of SouthsideShowdown.com. And also, you've been filling in lately for the Insiders podcast, right, on FanSided?
Yep, Baseball Insiders, talking a lot of White Sox over there as well from more of a zoomed out national perspective. But earlier today I was with Adam Weinrib and we talked about MLB All-Star Game snubs, the Home Run Derby, and a big change in the front office of the Washington Nationals. So go check that out after you finish with us here at Locked On White Sox.
Yeah, and Sam, where can we always find you on social media as well?
At Sam_Phalen on Twitter X. But of course, SouthsideShowdown.com is the place to go for all of your White Sox coverage in written form from myself, from Todd, and from many other writers that we have over here at FanSided.
All right. So, Sam, is it going to be a disappointment if the Sox take a pitcher at number 10?
Yeah, it is. I don't want to be so black and white and say yes, because obviously, like, best player available, the White Sox have to do what they have to do in terms of like player evaluation. And if there's a guy there that they fall in love with, I don't want to be annoyed at them if they draft him. But yeah, Todd, we need some position players in this farm system. The White Sox have called up Edgar Caro and Kyle Teal and Chase Mydroth and Colson Montgomery, but even some of these guys who have been promising, I would say, in the first MLB stint here, like Caro or Mydroth at times, I think they have relatively lower ceilings in terms of top prospects, right? I think they can be good everyday regulars on a contending team. But the White Sox really need to add some high upside, elite level offensive prospects. They have Caleb Bonham and Sam Antonacci and George Wolko and, Braden Montgomery. And all of those guys that I just mentioned are in high A or lower in the organization right now. So if 2027 is realistic for the White Sox, if we're going to end up supplementing the young pitching that the organization has, they need hitters that are going to get to the major leagues in the next few years, and they need to get them quick. And so, yeah, I would be bummed if it was a college pitcher or even a high school pitcher for the White Sox at number 10 overall. I just think now is the perfect time to go and get all of the offense.
Speaking of a high school pitcher, you wrote about him today. Cruz Schoolcraft has the sweetest name I've ever heard of a draft prospect right now.
Big league name for sure.
Yeah, that's definitely. But how you said, it's a risky proposition in two things. As you said, it's another pitcher, and when you need position players, even though he does have a hit profile, but nobody knows if he's really going to be like Shohei Ohtani. And number two is, Kylie McDaniel of ESPN's predicting, well, maybe just float him to the second round. But there might be another team that's like, you know what, I'll just overslot you to buy out whatever the White Sox promised you at 44. So, it just seems like if they go with Cruz Schoolcraft as a high school pitcher, I would be a little leery about that one, even though they love their Midwestern tall pitchers. Yeah,
that is honestly one of my worst fears for Sunday night, Todd, is that the White Sox come up at number 10 and they take a Jace Laviolette or a Gavin Kylan, and they're taking a little bit of a wild underslot pick so that they can save some money, and that they're trying to float a high schooler to the second round. And if you hit, then it's fantastic because then you ended up getting two really good prospects. But the White Sox did this very thing, and I think they got a little bit lucky when they drafted Garrett Crochet. They drafted Garrett Crochet to be an instant to the majors relief pitcher, and they took him to be an underslot guy so that they could float Jared Kelly to the next round. And they did this exact thing. Jared Kelly hasn't exactly worked out at all. He's still in Double-A and trying to figure it out as a relief pitcher. But the White Sox took a shot. And so my fear is that they're going to pass up on an opportunity to get a very toolsy, high upside high school shortstop like a Billy Carlson or JoJo Parker because they're trying to get cute and finding Cruz Schoolcraft in the second round, or, Jamie Arnold falls to them at number 10 and they feel like they just have to take this left-handed college pitcher. But White Sox fans look and say, where is Jamie Arnold's spot in the rotation? Even if he is good, even if he's ready by 2027, right? Like Noah Schultz, Hagen Smith, Shane Murphy, there's 3 left-handed pitchers right there. And you've got Shane Smith as an all-star and Sean Burke, Jonathan Cannon, Davis Martin, take your pick. Drew Thorpe coming back from injury. It's too many cooks in the kitchen. Go and get yourself a bat.
Yeah, and even if you try to float like, hey, maybe we can start, trade some of these guys. Like Jonathan Cannon, he's not going to, I don't think, get a huge trade return for a bat. Davis Martin, maybe, but again, you're talking about raised floor guys. And I would say, okay, maybe if Jamie Arnold is there, he's one of the few guys that I'm like, oh, you got to think long and hard. But then if you're doubling back for a high school player, which you should be doing, don't do it for Cruz Schoolcraft. Do it for like a guy like Caleb Bonemer. That's why I was fine with Hagen Smith last year, because at least they doubled back and got some more bats in the later, in second, third, fourth, basically the top, you want to hit in your top 5. I mean, because that's the first 150 picks. That's usually where the best players are available. So I'm fine with that. But what McDaniel is floating is like, I think, that would be getting too cute. Now, Chase Laviolette, I like that you brought him up. He's a huge wild card in terms of he does have a lot of power potential. He does have the Texas A&M, connection to Mike Shirley, but man, so volatile with the production.
You got to be sure on Cruz Schoolcraft, really. Like, you have to absolutely love that kid if you're coming away with Jace Laviolette at 10. And Todd, that's why I say that I think it would be a disappointment, because the White Sox, it's an unfortunate situation not being able to pick in the lottery and being forced down to 10th overall after a 41-win season. That's just such a gut punch to the fans. But I do think there is kind of a world here where this works out okay, because this is a draft class that kind of falls perfectly for what the White Sox need. They need to go position player, young, toolsy high school position player in a year where there's not a ton of great college bats out there. Could be a really good spot for them to pick Carlson, Parker, 10th overall, where I think White Sox fans are starting to get really excited about those prospects. And so the idea that you would come away with either a highly volatile college bat, like you mentioned, with somebody like Laviolette, or to go for a high school pitcher, or, if it's Kyson Witherspoon at 10 overall, it's just going to leave a really sour taste in the mouth of White Sox fans, I think, when they look at the makeup of the organization as a whole. You don't see a ton of trades now that are like prospects for prospects. So now you're talking about trading proven MLB talent, pitchers, in order to get the bats that you covet, and then banking on the unproven pitchers to then fill in and be good pitchers, just so that you can have a well-rounded team. Then it's kind of, cutting off your nose to spite your face. Like, what are we doing if we do that?
All right, I need you to give a PSA, because you have covered the NFL and now you're covering MLB. Can you kindly explain the difference between the two in like maybe a 2-minute PSA?
Oh, for draft season, you mean?
Because again, we're saying disappointment. Yes, it would be disappointment. But again, at the end of the day, these are, this is not like the NFL where you're going to get this guy immediately. And I agree with everything you're saying. But as you said, like, what are the subtle differences?
Well, for number one, right, it is the obvious thing that you're bringing up. In the NFL, we have players get drafted and we see them take the field in week 1, and you get immediate output from your draft picks. Sure, it may take a couple of years to really figure out, was this a good draft pick or a bad draft pick, as you start to see the draft class unfold. But you could go back right now, Todd, to the 2021 MLB draft class, and half the guys drafted in the first round have not made an appearance in Major League Baseball yet. This takes time for the dust to settle. We see all the time prospects who maybe are dormant for 3 to 4 years emerge and have very good big league careers. If a high school kid is drafted and he makes his MLB debut at 25 years old, 24 years old, which is what somebody like Chase Mydroth did, that means he sat in your minor league system for 6 or 7 years, and the White Sox would be without him all the way through the rest of this decade. So that is difference number one, is obviously the time that it takes to develop players. But number two, we need to all be aware of slot money, bonus slot money in the bonus slot pool. So if the White Sox come out, and I wrote this in my piece talking about the idea of Cruz Schoolcraft in the second round, if the White Sox come out at number 10 overall and they take a player that you've never heard of, and this is a guy who's ranked number 28 on MLB.com's big board, and it seems like a ridiculous reach for the White Sox to do it number 10, it's because they're doing it deliberately to save money. And so we need to get through the entire draft class, understand where exactly the White Sox use their money and why they made the moves they made before we kind of make a judgment about it. But also understand that if they take Crew Schoolcraft in the second round, they may have the next, I don't know, Tarek Skubal, and you might not know about it for 5 more years. So,
yeah, I'm glad that you pounded out to the money because, like, again, if a team reaches in the NFL, it's because they're reaching because of need. If the team reaches in Major League Baseball, it's because of finances. That's why you might see like how I've seen Ike Irish all over the place. I've seen him in the top 5. You've seen him. He's the Auburn catcher that the White Sox might take. On that type because he's a catcher in the outfielder. You've seen all these guys. I've seen JoJo Parker go as high as 4, and you've seen him go to the White Sox. Like it's all over the place in the mock drafts. But the other thing that I've noticed too is like in the cottage industry, and I know I'm going a little bit over time on the second segment, but in like the NFL mock draft, it's usually a lot of these guys are mocking because this is what I think the team needs. Where in MLB, some of these mock drafts, it's pretty much guys like Keith Law or Kylie McDaniel. They've actually talked to the teams and said, yeah, this is what we're doing because a lot of teams group guys. They put a list of 5-6 guys and they say, okay, which one are we going to take? Is it economics or best player available?
Well, and you can have conversations with the prospects ahead of time, which is a real interesting thing, is that these teams that do underslot, overslot, and get creative with their money, they're having conversations with these players. Like when the White Sox drafted George Wolko in the 7th, 8th, 9th round, somewhere around there. I don't remember exactly when it
6th
was.
round.
He was viewed as a first-round talent, and the White Sox had to have that conversation with George Wolko before they drafted him. Hey, what would it take to get you to sign? You want $1 million? Okay, and then the White Sox have to figure out how they can save $1 million for George Wolko to sign overslot. And in order to do that, they have to do a lot of underslot draft picks as well. So these players and their agents are negotiating with teams today, tomorrow, all the way leading up to the MLB draft. And those negotiations will continue during the draft. So like you said, mock drafts are a little bit more realistic. And it's not hearsay or speculation as much because the conversations are already happening.
All right, so the trade deadline is another way the White Sox can get some more future pieces. And let's discuss if it will be a dud, though, for the White Sox after the break on Locked On White Sox. If you're running a business, you know that every missed call is money left on the table. Think about the last time you had a service emergency, like a bursted pipe. If the first plumber didn't answer, did you wait? No. You called the next one. And that's why having a reliable business line is so important. And that's why you need OpenPhone. OpenPhone is the #1 business phone system that helps you streamline and scale customer communication, all from an app on your phone or computer. Do you juggle 2 phones just to keep business and personal calls separate? OpenPhone solves that problem instantly. Your whole team can share one number and respond to customers like a shared inbox, so no more, hey, who's handling this? And I'm telling my friends who run their own businesses, OpenPhone can provide a major boost to how their phone systems operate. It's one less worry for a small business owner to have. OpenPhone is offering Locked On White Sox listeners 20% off your first 6 months at openphone.com/LockedOnMLB. That's OPENPHONE.com/LockedOnMLB. And if you have an existing numbers with another service, OpenPhone will port them over at no extra charge. OpenPhone, no missed calls, no missed customers. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, shout out to all the everydayers. I appreciate your loyalty. Please hit the like button on today's episode. Recommend to your fellow Sox fans or baseball fans, friends, to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox, or where they get their podcasts, as the show is available on all major podcast platforms. Here with the site expert of SouthsideShowdown.com and of Survivor fame. He was robbed of that win, Sam Phalen. And Sam, does it feel like the White Sox best move might not be to do much at all besides trade Luis Robert Jr. and maybe some bullpen arms, given how young the rotation is and how Mike Tauchman could be a good clubhouse leader for the young bats and Adrian Hauser eating innings, and maybe the fact that we are maybe getting into the, hey, Adrian Hauser's had 9 great starts, but it's like, look at the rest of his career. I mean, it's been solid, but it's not been like this dominant ace. This just might be his hot streak.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think the White Sox should try to trade as much as possible. Anything with like real consistent control at premium positions, guys like Davis Martin, I'm holding on to. I'm not trading those guys. But like I mentioned earlier in the show, Steven Wilson with 2.5 years of control, having a tremendous season so far. Cash in on Steven Wilson's hot streak. Cash in on Adrian Houser's 9 really dominant starts so far. And as much as I know White Sox fans like Mike Tauchman, I'm in the trade Mike Tauchman camp as well. As it would be nice to have him in 2026. I forget what year it is half the time, Todd. 2026. It'd be nice to have Mike Tauchman for sure. He's a 34-year-old, and he is playing similar to Houser. If you look at Tauchman's numbers, he's having the best year of his career right now. He's having really, really solid games each and every day. I think you have to look at it from a lens of, realistically, are the Chicago White Sox going to compete with Mike Tauchman under contract? The answer to that is no. And because the answer to that is no, I'm open to moving him. Let Austin Slater, whoever, call up Dominic Fletcher. Let them play the outfield for 2 months in Chicago. Cash in if you can get a decent prospect that helps catalyze your rebuild a little bit.
Yeah, I actually talked about it on yesterday's episode where at first I was in the context, and I've even seen like Beeflo from the 108 just tweeted out, great, we're going to trade Mike Tauchman and Adrian Houser for another, over the hill prospect that has no options. But I was like, but at the same time, maybe if you package them together, while I really criticized the process last year of packaging, Fetty, Kopech, and Pham, it did get you Miguel Vargas. Now, I know he's in a slump, but it still was a high-end bat, and you need power bats. So this might be one of the few ways besides the draft to get some power into the organization.
Yeah, I mean, it's either a power player, like you said, that's maybe like more of a 1 or 2 tool guy that like just like really has a ton of power and you're trying to develop the rest of his game. Or I do think like Houser, Tauchman are players that can net you contributors, right? And I know White Sox fans are a little bit tired of the prospect that is a contributor but isn't actually a star. But look at what Chase Mydroth was in the Boston Red Sox system last year. I think he was like a fringe top 10 guy in their system. He wasn't in the top 100. On the surface, had the White Sox just acquired Chase Mydroth, nobody would really be all that excited. But when you get guys that have high floors and sort of these profiles of control of the strike zone or bat to ball skills, or pitchers that control the strike zone and have control of their arsenal, you can get major league contributors with extended amounts of major league control. So Adrian Houser was signed to a major league minimum deal when he was pitching in AAA for the Texas Rangers. If you can flip that guy for a prospect that contributes to your team for the next 5-6 years, that is a massive win. Mike Tauchman was signed to a major league minimum deal and has sort of had a nice little surge of 150 good at bats. If you can flip that for a long-term asset as well, sign me up for that.
Yeah, I just don't
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just saying, I just don't want to see them do like a 3-team trade. But like you said,
Yeah,
package them together and maybe get something and just don't deal with the Dodgers. But sorry to interrupt you on there.
Yeah, no, I think all of that is interesting, right? Like Luis Robert Jr., what value does he truly have to a contender? Not a ton when he can't hit, but there is something to be said about his defense and his base running and what that can mean down the stretch in a playoff run. So maybe you offer a team Adrian Houser and say, we'll give you this good, reliable, not sexy, but reliable starting pitcher, and then we'll throw him in with Luis Robert Jr. or a bat like Mike Tauchman, and you combine a few players, you maximize your upside, and you get 1 or 2 really solid prospects that can really have an impact in Chicago this year or next year, be quick to the majors, guys. That's what I want to see. The only real temporary asset that I think I'm on board with them holding on to right now is Aaron Savali, only because Aaron Savali just really hasn't pitched well. If he was pitching well, yeah, ship him for what you can. His value's up. His value's so far down right now that I think the innings that he eats and the veteran leadership in a locker room is better for the White Sox than whatever they would get for him in return.
Well, plus he has the better ability to maybe be a viable pitcher down the stretch than, say, Chris Flexen. I mean, Chris Flexen was just getting in the way. Savali at least can eat some innings and has shown in the past that he can be productive when he puts his mind to it. And he's going to be financially motivated too, because one of the reasons why he's on the White Sox is he didn't want to stay on the Brewers because he wanted to still be a starter so he could cash in free agency. So I totally agree with you on that one. Who is the ideal team you would love to see the White Sox pull off a deal with?
Wow, that's tough. I think I mean, I can't get over the fit with Hauser and the Cubs. And I kind of, I'll just say that. I want to see the White Sox and Cubs make a trade. I want Adrian Hauser going to the Cubs because outside of the on paper fit of like what the Cubs need down this home stretch in 2025, they have a very nice farm system and a lot of prospects that I think would be intriguing. A lot of bats in the Cubs farm system as well that I think would fit the White Sox. But I also just want to add a little bit of a little flair to the rivalry again, right? Like the White Sox Cubs rivalry was at its best 20 years ago. And we saw a little bit of a spike when Eloy Jimenez got traded to the White Sox and Dylan Cease got traded to the White Sox. And those guys were in the major leagues and the White Sox were competing. It was fun to watch former Cubs players take on the Cubs in a White Sox uniform. I want to see it again. So give me a White Sox and Cubs trade for Adrian Hauser.
Yeah, and even if you want to send Talkman back in that, like, yeah, I'm not expecting that they would get a Cease Eloy, but even if you look at like their top 15, now granted, I don't know how the Sox rank there because each team also has their different top 30 for each team, but Cubs have got some nice guys from 7 through 10 that I think
I mean, 12
you did a
of
piece
their
on that.
top 15. 12 of their top 15 right now are, position players. And a lot of them have projected ETAs in the major leagues of 2026 or 2027. And so, yeah, go target a first base outfield third baseman like Jonathan Long, who has an 877 OPS for the Cubs in AAA right now. He's the number 11 prospect in the system. Let's get Jonathan Long in a White Sox uniform for Adrian Hauser. Who says no to that?
I don't. I know you wrote about it. So, again, Sam, where can we find all your great content?
Well, you can go to Sam_Phalen on Twitter and X. You can go and go visit at Sox Showdown on Twitter and X as well for, tweets going out with all of the articles that we write over at SouthsideShowdown.com, which you should also go check out for written content about the White Sox on a daily basis.
All right, well, that wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the all-new Locked On MLB Game Night. Every game, every night, all season long. Get local analysis on a national scale. Find MLB Game Night on Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. And I'll be back tomorrow to discuss, just give a full draft preview with Locked On Guardians host Justin Latta. He's also a prospect guru, so you're like, why are you doing a crossover? Well, he's very objectable, all that stuff. He's been on other White Sox podcasts too. Feel free to leave comments about today's discussion with Sam Phalen of SouthsideShowdown.com. You can leave them at the episode page on YouTube, X, formerly Twitter, at Todd J. Delver, at Locked On Sox, or you can email me at LockedOnWhiteSox@gmail.com. Have a great day. See you tomorrow.